who might be experiencing the same things, or who is going to do the same work in image classification and AI development. So those are my supervisors. May you know some of them, including Dr. Robert. So the work is titled Development of a Deep Learning Model for the Detection of Sickle Cell Disease from Peripheral Blood Smears. Uh, from the sessions we had on Tuesday about sickle cell, you might have noticed that sickle cell disease diagnostics are still a challenge in the country. From the highlights we got from Prof. Chiguli, you saw that some of the existing methods are still having challenges in the country. In the olden days, the main method for diagnosis was microscopy. They would do a sickling test. Sickling test is, okay, let me first give a background about sickle cell disease. Sickle cell disease is a genetic condition, like you heard from some of the presenters on Tuesday. Genetic condition. It is you're born with it, and you live with it throughout your life unless you get maybe a bone marrow transplant or something like that. Diagnostics is still a challenge in the country. Um, we have about 1.4 million births in the country every year, but only about 100,000 are diagnosed of sickle cell disease out of the 1.4. So diagnostics is still a challenge. So in the olden days, they would use the sickling test where they collect the blood sample, put a reagent, I think mostly was sodium bisulfate, induce sickling, and then check whether there are sickle cells using microscopy, light microscopy. Just look under a microscope, see if there are any sickled cells in that blood sample, or in the blood smear, rather. Those who don't know blood smears, you can see this one here. That's a blood smear. They just get a drop of blood, put on a glass film, and look through the microscope. So that is having issues or had issues. It was being subjective because the person has to look through and then judge whether this cell is this shape, this cell is the other shape. Non-scalable is that it was a lot of work for one person to do that. Inconsistent results. We find some hematologist is saying this, another hematologist is saying something else. Maybe I'm seeing 10 sickled cells, the other one is saying I'm seeing 5, stuff like that. So it would lead to low accuracy and then it was labor intensive. So recently, Ministry of Health enrolled a program where a universal national program where samples are collected from the different hospitals or clinics in the country, but those are government facilities. And they are taken to UNHLS where they do isoelectric focusing. But studies that have assessed that program ever since it started in 2014 have recommended that we should opt for a point of care testing. Sorry for that. Point of care testing system, because it is not being as comprehensive as they thought it would. Out of the 1.4 million births, it's only covering about 50,000. It's having so many intermittent results, had huge turnaround times up to a month when people have not received their results. Some mothers can even leave and not come back to the facility because the results took long. Um, the result relay systems, because someone has to wait for the results to come from Kampala, someone is in Kumi. The results were sent to Kampala 3 weeks down the road, they haven't gotten the results yet. And then the logistics, it's funded by Cincinnati University in Canada, whose funding might go anytime. So they called for a widespread point of care testing from those recommendations that they had there. So in this work, we are proposing that why don't we go back to the original system and improve it? Maybe we remove the human aspect when it comes to interpretation of those blood smears and have an AI model to do the interpretation. Maybe that would improve the issues that this original system had for microscopy. So that is what this work is focusing on. I've talked about that. So the objectives is to develop the deep learning model that can detect sickle cell disease from blood smears of sickle cell patients. Then, of course, you have to validate that system using real life samples from the hospitals and see if the deep learning model is working well with them. And for that, we chose Yumbe Regional Referral Hospital in the West Nile, where the burden is a little high. It's the second highest burden in the country. And then after we shall investigate the interpretability of the model. This is work that Shirley was doing to see how this model is coming up with its judgments, depending on the features that it's identifying to be associated with sickle cell disease from those smears. The samples that we are using for training of the model, we are using images, red blood cell images mostly, but some data sets we got had also leukocyte images for the training of the model, and then later on for the validation, we shall use blood smears from the hospital. So those are some of the sources where we are getting the data sets from for the training, and then for the validation, we shall be using about 81 samples calculated using a formula for finding accuracy of a test. This will be, or this is the workflow that we are following. A collection of images from the image banks. Those are publicly available images for the training of the model. And then we shall prepare, or we are preparing those images, then texturize the model, then train, do some testing in case the model is not performing well. We do parameter hypertuning, go back until it's perfect, and then we shall validate through those samples there. We validate against the gold standard done at UNHLS in Butabika. That is isoelectric focusing. That is just the conceptual framework, the independent variables, the model, and then what it shall be reporting. Sickle cell disease or no sickle cell disease. In case there's sickle cell disease, we shall try to find the sickle cell index. This is severity of disease. How many of the samples are sickled? How many of the samples are elongated? Because most times the sickling is not perfect. Eh? You know the shape of a sickle. Eh? So it's not perfectly a crescent moon, but sometimes most times actually, they just appear as elongated cells. You're going to see them. So these are some of the sources that we are using for getting the data sets for training. And then for the model training and model development, we are using TensorFlow, but as you will see in this presentation, the challenge we are getting, so might opt to use PyTorch like we discussed on Tuesday. Okay, so the work now. So first of all, we started with training the model using full images. So we'd give the model full images of either a normal, this is a normal cell profile, blood smear. You can see the red blood cells are circular, biconcave, and what? You can see how they appear. Then this is a sickle cell patient. You see some cells are elongated. So we started by training the model using such images. So the model that was developed was a CNN with that architecture. I mean, I may not go into details, but those who are familiar, you may know some of these 4 convolutional 2D layers, rectified linear units with those number of filters, and then each of them takes a max pooling layer, then a flattening layer to flatten them out, and then a dense layer for the classification. That was the model's architecture. So the results, when we trained with the first leukocyte dataset, the training accuracy was 94%, and then the validation, because what happens, just a background, what happens is when you're training the model, you divide your data set into a training set and a validation set. So usually a ratio of 80% and 20% is used. 80% of the data set that you have is for training, 20% is for validation. You train the model, then validate how it's performing. So you have these images which you know what groups they fall under. So you give the model these images, you tell it, this image is a sickle cell image. So it learns. Then you give it another image and don't tell it, and you see if it predicts it properly. That's with training and validation. So that data set had about 10,000 images after augmentation. The training accuracy was 94, and then the validation accuracy was 95. We did transfer learning, use the same model for another data set. So you train it, and then, because here it was classifying into, don't know if you can see down here, it's not clear, sorry. It was classifying into 4 categories for the leukocytes: eosinophils, basophils, monocytes, and neutrophils. So we used the same model, trained it here, then used it for another data, trained it with another data set that contained leukemia images. So it was predicting into either there's leukemia or not. The idea is that these, though the classification classes are different, but we're just making it used to seeing these particular shapes. Because you see these images have red blood cells and white blood cells in there. So training accuracy was 100%, validation accuracy 96%. I went to another data set now, which is a SQL cell data set. I trained it and it was classifying into two classes, SQL cell or no SQL cell. Training accuracy was 96, validation accuracy being 89. And then we went now to our validation sets. We got some of the validation samples. And not so nicely, we were getting not exactly 0, but it was classifying every image as SQL cell, even those that were normal. So it wasn't doing well with new data. I shared with Prof on Monday, and he took me back here. He's like, you see these particular images, even these ones that you're using for training, because the validation image is even more different from this. These two images are very different. You see here, this is a dirty background, this is a clean background. So this model that you are tasking with a lot of work to, first of all, just give it this whole image and tell it to identify features that are associated with SQL cell. Having a very small data set, which is very different, validation different from training, the model will not perform well. So the best option to do there is to opt for, thing is dead. Okay. Is to opt for using individual cells rather than just giving it the whole blood smear to learn from that. So we tried that. So what the idea is to extract individual cells from this smear and then train it that this cell is circular, this cell is sickled or elongated, and this is other shape. So, and then we can map that back onto the original smear. So you can see here that this is segmentation, contouring, identifying those individual cells within the smear and then pulling them out and training the model with individual cells instead of just giving it a blanket smear. So tried something called thresholding, where we're trying to now identify the individual cells within the smear, but got issues with that regarding sensitivity and specificity. So you can see in this image that when you put the thresholds high, the thresholds low, there is high sensitivity and low specificity. So you can see some areas are getting marked as cells, yet they are not, because they're just some background with a little bit of pixel densities. Then this one is high thresholds now, high specificity, and we are ending up losing some of those cells. They're not being picked. So again, found another solution, which was through something called edge detection. So first we convert the original, now this is a cell. We convert that image, which is colored, to a grayscale. That is a monochrome. And then we do edge detection. So used 5 different edge detection techniques, Kani, Log, Prewitt, Robert, Sober. Then found that Kani was the best and opted for that. So you can see this is the other blood smear now, edge detected. So the cells have been highlighted out. It's going to be easier for them to be picked out through segmentation. Then discovered that high resolution images were not working well. So you can see this is Kani edge detection with high resolution image. Low resolution image is coming out better, even with adjusting of thresholds. So the idea is break down this image into the individual cells, and then you will classify each of these and then count them and then infer SQL cell disease from there. So we built a new model Now, this is a little bit different. I may not go into the details. This had 3 convolutional layers, 3 maximum layers, flat and dense, dropout, and then the output, classifying into 3 classes. This is the architecture. Inputs a red blood cell image, the different layers here and there, and then flatten and whatever. So, with this new method, trained that model using now individual cells, got a data set that had individual cells that had been classified into circular, elongated, and other. So training accuracy was 99.4, validation accuracy being 93. And then we now validated using images that we got from now our validation set. So we got the validation images, the full smears, broke them down through the process I've just explained, the edge detection and segmentation, and then accuracy is now up to 90%. We believe we can even make this better. These are the accuracies. I did this on about 196 samples, and I've gotten an accurate. No, this is training rather. This is training. Training used a data set of about 6,000 images. Sorry, I didn't state that here. 6,000 images. So accuracy is about 90, and then that is the model loss. So when you train the model, as you keep training the model, there can be loss because you this model, when you give it more data, it overfits. So it may not work well with new data because it is now just cramming the data you're giving it. So when you give it new data, it may not work well. It may not generalize properly. So that's why loss usually just keeps increasing for the validation set. These are now the 196 samples I've tested on. These are online images, and these are the ratios of elongated images I'm getting, but we're still doing more work to improve the accuracy before we go to the real validation from clinical samples. What next? Improve the edge detection through, because there's a problem where you have blood smears that one blood smear has a lot of light, the other has very little light. So you find a problem with pixel densities, they're not similar across. So you cannot use similar thresholds when you're doing edge detection. So we have to find a way of dealing with that. And then also find a threshold that indicates disease, because what now we are doing mere counting of cells. So we have to find at what ratio do we say that there is disease or not. Then we shall have to also do determine severity of disease from the number of elongated or sickled cells, and then we shall validate using hospital. This is some of the work I'm doing. So you trying to those are slides there with blood. This is a microscope, light microscopy, but it's connected to a camera that is capturing those images. But even if a facility doesn't have that, you can just attach your phone there and take the image. So thank you to S. Makere Site Project and Case Western.
Awesome. Thank you, Fahim. I'll take 2 questions.
Thank you very much. The name is Mukasa Oliogo. My question is not directly on the deep learning, but it's on the sickle cell. Maybe I don't know whether I may be in position to answer it, but it is like, is it true that carriers have some degree of protection against malaria infection than their counterparts, the sicklers? And if so, what could be the pathophysiology in relation to that? Secondly, what could be the contributing factor to high prevalence of sickle cell disease in certain regions like the eastern and the northern parts of the country? Is it ethnically related, culture related? Is it diet, or is it something like that? I don't know whether you've tried to get some more information about that. Thank you very much.
That was before I forget. So the first question you've asked, it's actually my interest. Maybe if someone funds me for PhD, that is my interest. So yes, several papers have been published that carriers are protected from malaria. But that is in terms of acquiring malaria. But when it comes to severity, when they get the malaria, including the sickle cell patients actually, when they get malaria, it's more severe in them than people who are normal, because these people are already anemic, especially the sickle cell patients. But yes, carriers are protected from malaria due to some physiology, which is a little bit complicated. Yeah, but usually, simply put, is because some of the cells are defective and malaria parasites cannot grow in them, simply put. Yeah. The other question was about? Oh, the prevalence. So it's mostly now it's mostly that protection that has caused over time, over the years, over the millennia and the centuries. That protection from malaria is the one that has increased the prevalence in some regions rather than others. So, for example, you see in India, it is a lot because areas where there is a lot of malaria, where malaria is endemic, are having a lot of the trait. And when you have so much of the trait, you'll have so much of the disease. So what happens is that there's selection. So when there's a lot of malaria, there's selection for people with that trait. Then as they multiply, the disease also increases.
Thank you, Fahim, for the presentation. When you're doing transfer learning, you mentioned that you used the leukemia dataset, and yet we are looking at sickle cell disease.
Yeah.
So it didn't really make sense to use that. Are the features still the same that you'll be looking at? Because I would think leukemia cells may look a little bit different from sickle cell. So could clarify on that. Maybe that's why the model performed as badly as you said.
Probably. It's an idea I borrowed from about 2 papers that claim that it is what hoped their model to perform well, because they didn't have a big enough data set for sickle cell training. So what they did, they gave it images that are just related. For you to first learn, if you're building a model from scratch and not using pre-trained weights, for you to first learn how this data might look like, just basically just giving it shapes that might look like the real red blood cells or that's going to be looking at in the future. That was the idea, but probably it doesn't work. I don't know. I'll find out.
Okay, I think that's all for the questions. Thank you, Fahim. Next, we are going to have a pre-recorded session from Zoe Sechoanda. She is PhD. Sorry, I forget you are the expert in the room.
Very nice work. I'm impressed that you managed to get it done from Monday to Thursday. You managed to implement CANI detection and run the analysis. That's very cool. So we can talk after the session. There are some other networks which you could use for segmenting out the cells if you want to test that out. CANI is fine. CANI is very efficient, so I'm not going to say you should change, but if you want to test it out, you can. The other idea was that one question I had is for the data sets you have, those images that you have, right, where you have the images with sickle cell and then you have the images which are healthy cells. So do you have a proportion or do you have some kind of score of the sickle cell presence on these images versus the normal ones? Because you could try to use that to train the network rather than segmenting out the cell. Does that make sense?
In terms of having the number of cells that...
Yeah. Do you have any score or anything for the sickle cell images?
No, actually, I don't.
Okay.
I was actually thinking about it because using my own threshold was not making sense. So I think I have to get a hematologist to help me with those images and count.
So I have some ideas for that. We can talk about that after the session. Okay. Last point was going to be that, so I like the idea of doing the segmentation because you can tell where it gets it right versus wrong. One idea I had for you was you don't need to take those cells and again run them through a deep learning network. You could take the cell and just take basic measurements from the cell, like just the length, the circularity, like simple things. And that will probably help you find 80%, 90% of the cells, right? And it may be much faster than trying to build a whole deep learning model. Just an idea. Not saying you have to do it, but just an idea. Good work.
Thank you.
PhD student in the Department of Biomedical Engineering at Case Western Reserve University. Hello, everyone. Good evening, good morning. Hope everyone is okay. My name is Zoe. Secunda. I'm a PhD student in the Department of Biomedical Engineering at Case Western Reserve University. And I work in Umut Rukani's lab. Rukani's lab. Hello, everyone. Good evening, good morning. Hope everyone is okay. My name is Zoe Secunda. I'm a PhD student in the Department of Biomedical Engineering at Case Western Reserve University. And I work in Umut Rukani's lab. In today's talk, I did like to talk about one of our technologies that I've been working on in my PhD. And in today's talk, it's titled Microfluidic Imaging Systems for Single Cell Level Mechanobiology and Biophysics Studies of Red Blood Cells. I did like to slightly give a slight background on red blood cells, hemoglobin, and why these different properties are very essential for the next experiment that we try to conduct in our lab. So we all know blood is a very important component. Specifically, its major role is for transportation of transportation of oxygen from the lungs to the tissue. Just as we are seated right now, each one of us has 6 liters of red blood, and 3 million red blood cells are being generated or produced for every second as we are speaking now. And that amounts to 25 trillion red blood cells in our body. Of all those the cells that we have in our body, 84% of those cells are particularly red blood cells. So this means red blood cells are very important and very vital to our body. And in each one of the red blood cells, we have 270 million hemoglobin molecule. Just imagine how much hemoglobin we have if in one red blood cells we have almost 270 million. So as blood traverses from the lungs where it picks up the oxygen that binds to the hemoglobin, it moves close to 12,000 miles, which is like a distance from New York to Los Angeles. That's quite a distance to move, and it takes that route in almost 3 minutes. So in 3 minutes, it takes it to circulate all those 6 liters of blood like we looked in the previous slide. And also in those the smallest capillary where those blood cells travel through, like they come to the lungs, then go back to the tissue, is 5 microns, and the largest is 1.2 inches. That's quite even very small. So like I said in the first slide, blood has very many important roles. One of them is transportation of gases. 2 is regulation of vesicular flow. And then detoxifying of hemoglobin, where we have the red blood cells being broken down and then forming the ions in the body. But most of my work that I'll actually focus on is the transportation of gases. The incense, which is the main primary role of actually red blood cells, they come to the tissue, to the lungs, they pick up oxygen, traverse back into the tissue, deposit this oxygen, and then move through that cycle, which is the most important work and the primary work of red blood cell. So most of my focus, looking at this slide, I'll focus on the transportation of gases and how we use those properties to define if the red blood cells are healthy, even if blood is healthy, or if hemoglobin is executing, or if there are other conditions that are impacting the behaviors of red blood cells. Now, looking at just the red blood cells, just the size of a red blood cell is 7.5 micrometers, and if half of it is 2.5, the red blood cell has no nuclei or mitochondria. So how does it generate? That means it needs ATP. So it needs a lot of ATP for its other functions that we'll look at later. Certain properties or certain conditions impact the health of red blood cells. Like I said earlier, it's very key to look at how this red blood cell, is it in the right size? Does it actually pick up the right oxygen? Does it move as expected? Because each of these properties are very key for its understanding, for the devices that would evolve, for diagnosis and monitoring different patients. So certain conditions actually impact how the health of red blood cells. They become very stiff and then even tend to occlude those small vessels, which later leads to certain conditions like occlusion, crisis like certain patients are facing in like sickle cell disease. So the health of red blood cell, just one red blood cell takes a cycle of 120 days. And in certain conditions like sickle cell disease, they impact the life of red blood cells. And several other conditions, like in sickle cell disease, I said for them, the lifetime of red blood cells does not last for 120 days, but rather 20 days. So these properties as well are key in understanding how blood is stored, transfused blood, and also the recently developed studies like the synthetic blood in drug delivery and also in assessment of diabetes, as it's well known that it relies on the lifespan of hemoglobin. So I said sickle cell disease is one of those conditions that impacts the lifetime of red blood cells. So sickle cell disease is a very common hemoglobin disorder that occurs when one of the hemoglobin molecule, amino acid, is replaced by another one. So basically, these disorders affect the behavior of how red blood cells behave under different oxygen levels, even specifically at low oxygen levels, they tend to change shape, become very stiff. Sickle cell disease highly affects low-income countries or even middle-income countries like in Uganda. One, it's because the diagnosis is not clearly well understood, and also the monitoring, and also even as later on in my presentation, I'll show you that these drugs there are less drugs that are very available for these patients. Like I said, in sickle cell disease is a mutation where we have a change of one amino acid, and this amino acid affects the properties of red blood cells. So in healthy patients, in patients with sickle cell disease, the red blood cells change shape. This happens because the hemoglobin within the red blood cells tend to polymerize, and then they become very stiff, changing the cell or the red blood cells, changing also into the Chicotte shape as it's being shown here in our current slide. So worldwide, 300 million people are carriers, specifically like in Uganda. I think according to the current statistics, 1 in 4 Ugandans are carriers of these conditions. And then 30 million have a disease. The impact is more in growing countries, developing countries like in Uganda, and slightly lower in other developed countries or highly resourced environment like in the US and Europe. I think it's specifically because there are many tools that are currently available for diagnosis and monitoring this patient. And these statistics are meant to increase over time. By 2050, it is projected that there will be a growth in the disease by 30%. So the properties of red blood cells specifically rely on something called the Bohr effect, which is a very common property that has been studied for a long time. So hemoglobin traverses between two different states as it's moving from fully deoxygenated state to in the lungs, and then as it goes to deposit this oxygen into the tissue, then it moves between that cycle. So in the lungs, actually we have the pH in the lungs is high. However, in the tissue, the pH is slightly lower as oxygen is being deposited. So these properties are key, especially in how we study oxygen affinity, oxygen dissociation from the hemoglobin. So earlier scientists, what they actually did to study these properties of oxygen transportation, they developed an oxygen dissociation curve. And this curve slightly mimics the property of how we move, cells go to the lungs and then pick up tissue, pick up the oxygen, and then come back into the tissue and then deposit this oxygen. So when we look at the right side of this curve, that is where we have extremely very high oxygen in the lungs. And then as you come to the slope of this peak to when it plateaus, that is where we are looking at it in the tissue, where we have low oxygen levels. Now, in between is where we have the different parts of the body, where we look at the kidneys, where we have the start of the capillary bed. So that is within. Now, focusing slightly on that curve, as the curve shifts to the right, you notice that that is where we have a low oxygen affinity, meaning those cells, once they're in the tissue, they deposit more oxygen than it's actually required. So it shifts the curve to the right. And then looking at the curve to the left, it means these patients or these cells have more oxygen than it's required. So it is key to monitoring in between how oxygen traverses between especially analyzing it between this curve. So patients with sickle cell disease tend to suffer from low oxygen affinity. Once the cells are in the tissue, they easily release this oxygen. And then once they release the oxygen, the hemoglobin piles together, forming these polymers. And then that is actually the beginning of the conditions or the different signs that we see in patients with sickle cell disease, like crisis, and then leading to low oxygen supply in different tissues. So, like I said earlier, now when you look at that curve, it is very key in assessing the oxygen dissociation. But what parameters do we pick from that curve? We pick a P50. Half of that curve, then we are able to study from the P50, looking at its partial pressure of oxygen, if the curve shifted more to the right or to the left. If the curve shifted more to the right, there will be a higher partial pressure. Then if the curve shifted more to the left, there will be a slightly less partial pressure, at which 50% of the oxygen is released from these cells. So part of my PhD work has been able to study these properties of hemoglobin, properties that highly impact the hemoglobin dissociation from, or the oxygen dissociation from the hemoglobin. And I've also studied other molecules that actually impact the dissociation curve, like 2,3-DPG, ATP, and the of course, the polymers that form about within the red blood cells and then lead to the deformability. So in this study, we have done a mechanistic study to also understand how these agents like Voxtereta, the PIC, which is a common currently a drug, recently has been recalled, but it's one of the drugs that has been on market to increase oxygen affinity within patients with sickle cell disease. And then other common drugs that are currently being in clinical trials, like the PKR activators, which are meant to study as well to lower the 2,3-DPG, thereby increasing the oxygen affinity. So this is part of the study that has been ongoing in my PhD. So I study how these 2,3-DPG small molecules, particularly that are improved by PKR activators, slightly improve or impair the ATP, because like I said in the beginning, red blood cells do not have mitochondria. So how do they generate this ATP? Through this pathway. And then I study how the red blood cells, all these drugs improve the ATP, and then which pathway do they pass specifically in sickle cell disease. So in still my PhD, there's a saying that if you can't measure it, then you cannot be able to determine if it's actually working or it is diseased or not. So still part of my PhD, we've been able to develop a new assay that is able to measure oxygen affinity. The current method for measuring oxygen affinity are not readily available. Like currently where we are at the university, we have to send samples to another different town to be able to measure this oxygen dissociation curve or oxygen affinity. And I would really expect that if where we have a lot of resources, we do not have access to these devices. So it's probably the same case that in Uganda, we would not be having. It's possible that we can't have even a very single device that can measure oxygen affinity. So part of my PhD, before I even studied the mechanism, we had to find a way of how do we measure these different parameters. Then we can easily be able to study them. So we've developed a high throughput assay that measures oxygen affinity, and it's based on how the assay actually works. It is based on properties of hemoglobin as it changes from oxygen, fully oxygenated state to deoxygenated state. We've used light to observe that step, or to be able to monitor that step or that transition. And then we've developed also different other molecules like oxygen sensors that are able to that are able to read those oxygen levels within the assay as we are dissociating. Then we are able to develop an oxygen dissociation curve. So in my PhD, I've been able to look at these different properties. How do we measure these different properties like oxygen affinity? And how does oxygen affinity, when red blood cells lose the oxygen affinity, how does it impact deformability? When we have an impact on deformability, how does it affect adhesion? Because all these are different parameters that are key in assessment of a single red blood cells as it moves through these different capillaries, moves through taking its different properties as a red blood cell. So, like I said, if we can't measure it, then we can't be able to improve it. Our lab has also developed all these different assays like adhesion, deformability, red blood cell density, hemoglobin composition, and rheology. All these are different assays that have been developed previously by some of the previous PhD students. And we've used these assays to assess or study them, looking at also these different properties of red blood cells. So to mimicking the rheology or the blood cells, we've developed, the earlier group students have developed a flow assay that we're able to measure how red blood cells travel within a capillary. And in these assays, we actually mimic the exact environment of these capillaries. Some of these assays, we develop these microfluidic assays and then attach different proteins to slightly exactly mimic the microvesicles. So these different assays that we've developed, like we could attach different proteins like P-selectin, E-selectin, fibronectin, and lemonin to these different microfluidic chips, and then thereby we assess how then red blood cells behave within those different chips. As we study these different red blood cells, we study them under hypoxic conditions, normoxic conditions, and then also we study them. Thereby, here we understand how these red blood cells flow under different motion, and also how these red blood cells attach to different surface or different proteins of the microvesicles or the different microfluidic assays. So also within our lab, we study how these red blood cells adhere to surface. Part of the work, as you could see this video, different red blood cells attach, and then so in this work, one of our PhD students developed this assay, and then we look at how the cells do not fully adhere permanently, but red blood cells adhere and then detach, deform, and then detach, and then adhere again, and then deform, and then detach. So they go through that cycle of adhesion. So through this attachment, detaching, we then study the different red blood cells, how they adhere to these surfaces, to this, and then we study this helps us understand the behaviors of red blood cells as they attach to these different proteins like P-selectin. And then we also study these drugs as, do these drugs that are currently being developed improve this attachment, or do they actually worsen the behavior of red blood cells? So part of my PhD work has been to modify these assays. Like previously in our lab, we had developed an occlusion assay, which assesses the deformability of red blood cells. So in part of my PhD, we've been able to modify this assay, not only to read occlusion under normoxic conditions, which is normoxic, I would mean this term looking at high oxygen levels, but also assessment of oxygen deformability under low oxygen levels. So we've been able to develop a new assay where we assess red blood cells under low oxygen levels, like closer to 20 millimercury, which are closer to the oxygen levels that happen within the spleen or like within the kidney. And a key other parameter is to understand how these genetic therapies, which are some of them are focused on increasing fetal hemoglobin. Fetal hemoglobin is hemoglobin that we usually have when we're babies. When a baby is usually born, you have a higher concentration of fetal hemoglobin. But over time, this concentration of fetal hemoglobin reduces, then you have hemoglobin A. Now, in patients with sickle cell disease, instead of having hemoglobin A, their sickle hemoglobin increases. And then how do we know that these therapies are actually working? And if their target is to lower the fetal hemoglobin, to increase the fetal hemoglobin, how do you know that within a red blood cell, like I said, one red blood cell has 270 hemoglobins. How do you ensure that one red blood cell has clearly all the hemoglobins that are being modified, genetically modified, that it has enough hemoglobin? Because if you have a sample where you have one cell has 270, how do you ensure that there is enough hemoglobin that has been generated after the gene therapy? So part of our study, or most of the gene therapies are actually targeting to that avenue of increasing fetal hemoglobin. And our work as biomedical engineers is to understand and then study how do we get to a cure where we have more fetal hemoglobin within the red blood cell. And our work is to develop assays that can make that assessment. So the question remains in our studies, how do we then make sure that the genetic therapies or the therapies that are being developed are working effectively, or even the drugs? And then also, like I said, sickle cell happens to affect mostly low-resourced areas. How do we ensure that also these technologies are actually highly focused on highly targeting not only the highly resourced environment, but also will also help in low resource areas? So that is where we are at. And then with some different genetic studies are currently looking at how do these gene therapies that are being developed target also low resource areas. And also, I think that's a question for all us as engineers, is to develop point of care devices that could not only make assessments for diagnosis, but also how do they monitor these gene therapies that are currently being developed. So the transition of personalized medicine from different, specifically for sickle cell, is very interesting, that we have very many questions that still underway. Like from screening, there was development of Voxtereta, hydroxyurea, then we have transfusion, then these new drugs that are being developed, Ictavopeta, then we have Voxtereta, then the new gene therapy. These all remain into a very complex situation where, as developers or researchers, we have a very big task on how do we improve these things. Because imagine if someone has, like I said, sickle cell highly impacts low resource areas, and then they have to be on treatment that is very expensive. How do they actually sustain that? So it is key to assess. It is key to also look at how do we make these drugs more easily effective, not only in terms of effective to patients, but also how do we make sure that the costs are economic enough that low-resourced patients are able to access them. So the question remains on all of us: how do we also only looking at these drugs, but also making their assessment? So these assays that we've developed are able to look at these different assessments, but also are these assays at a point of care level to be able to breach these complex costs that in low resource areas they can easily be accessible. So this is our team, grateful multi-cultured team that we've developed with. I'm highly honored to be part of this team. Thank you so much. These are some of our founders. Thank you so much. I'll be If someone has any questions, you can reach out to my email. It is zxs389@kes.edu, or you can also reach out to my PI, the email that I've added here. Thank you so much for listening. I would probably welcome questions right now.
Thank you so much, Zoe. If you have questions for Zoe, she has provided her email, but if you have other questions, and you would like to say them out, I could note them down and we shall email them to Zoe. Anyone?
I just wanted to know about whether we can actually use, so for first question, how do the assays work and how are they exactly targeting or looking for affinity? And the second one that I have is, I want to see if, can we use that to actually measure the affinity in normal people? For example, one of the things that we really look at is oxygen carrying capacity in athletes is very key. So is there a different thing one would see, not in sickle cell patients, but that's if I'm relating it to something else, because I didn't even know it could happen.
Any more questions? Okay, now that you provided her email, we shall get this to her and get feedback to the people. At this moment, I would like to invite Dr. Robert for the session on potential topics for funding by the site program that will take us into our lunch break. Thank you.
Thanks, Rachel and Benedict. Afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. And I'm supposed to talk about the potential topics for funding. And I thought I could do it in two ways. One, continue with the presentation I was making on Monday before time caught me out, because I was going to start giving examples of projects that we are funding already, and maybe you can develop some ideas from that. And then number two is to also maybe give you a chance for you to say, oh, I think I'll be interested in a topic like this one. And you can have some live feedback on whether we can potentially fund that through the site program or not. So let me start with just giving you some of the projects that we've funded. And this is just generally talking on the vast amount of PhD topics that people are looking at doing across Case Western Reserve University through our funding. And we have some trainees who are not funded by our program, but still there. And again, other people across the different parts of the world. And in many ways, I defined a very generic area of interest, and people can build units and systems from there. And I think I'll go on to discuss that. So when we look at research, design, and innovations for the context, and the context is basically meaning for our LMICs, I think if you remember from all the presentations, things have been presented as the disease burdens and the issues and what have you, and it usually ends with, this is even more so in LMICs. This is even more so when you talk of TB, when you talk of sickle cell, when you talk of HIV, when you talk of malaria, everything. So it's like we are in it for the ride. And if it must happen, it's really up to me or up to us to help to figure out what we need to do with our problems. And the good team that we have at Case Western Reserve University is willing to support us develop our own solutions. I've always been interested in what I call contextually appropriate technologies, but potentially of a global impact. Because if you just develop something for Chanamukaka, who's from Chanamukaka here? No one. If you just develop for Chanamukaka, you may struggle to actually generate enough interest for even the local government to listen, let alone the international community. So we want to develop something and say, well, we are using this tool to solve this, and this has a potentially wider application than what we are having right now. So for this, I think I want to linger around this site, which I think some of you call site, but the full name is Strengthening Research Capacity in Innovative Global Health Technologies for Non-Communicable Diseases in Uganda. And you might ask me, why non-communicable diseases? Why not infectious diseases? Usually you define your interest and then you look for funding. And the funding sort of tweaks the way you pitch. For example, I spent a great deal of time writing a proposal, more or less like this one, but it was for HIV and TB in Uganda, right? And the cool thing about being technologists is you get a technology and you apply it to so many different platforms. We've seen people talking about AI in being applied to cancerous cells. We had Professor Joe Willis and Professor Satish, and then here, Fahim has just been presenting about that same technology can be applied to sickle cell, and you can go on and on and on. So when the non-communicable disease was because the call was specifically for non-communicable diseases, but the technologies we want to be able to apply widely. So just to give a brief brief on the objectives, we want to train biomedical engineering students in the PhD program at Case Western Reserve University, preparing them to build research and training programs in Uganda. People here will ask me, I'm not a biomedical engineer, why do you want me to switch to biomedical engineering? I think the reason I am here and the reason that Professor Rollins is there is for us to have that discussion. You know, people have presented. Fahim, what's your background? Biomedical lab tech, bioinformatics. So he could be thinking, well, I think I could pursue this AI further. Could I qualify for this PhD program? And in many ways, we want to be able to entice people, but also to see that we have the best fit of people who can go and take on the PhD. It's quite intense. Case is one of the best universities we have in the world, and one of the first universities to start biomedical engineering in the world. So the BME program is really, really, really robust. But from Zoe, I think you saw Solomon, the pre-recorded presentations, you can see that, you know, the work is really in-depth. Yeah, you even forget that these people are engineers. You think they are what, they are physiologists or something. They talk about blood like there's no tomorrow, for example. And then another one is to support research projects at Makerere, master's level at Makerere University for BME adjacent fields. So this is why you guys are here. You are being supported, or you could potentially be recruited into being supported for BME in the BME adjacent fields, as long as you are doing a BME related topic, which is something that someone asked me about. Can't see him here, so he would again ask me when he sees me, because he was asking me. So what if I want to look for a biomarker that, you know, may or may not be linked to this particular condition? Yeah, he's over there now. I didn't want to identify you, but since you were out, I said something that was specifically targeting you, and you were not there, so I'm going to say it again. I was saying that we want to fund projects that have got a high linkage to biomedical engineering, so medical devices. And I remember in our discussion, we were talking about, what about if I want to explore whether this biomarker is linked to ABC? And I said, I might struggle to fund that. And I hope by the breadth of the presentations that have been put here, you are sort of convinced or unconvinced. And why I put in the bit of being unconvinced is we have Brian, who presented a master's project, which is looking at urine soluble endocrines, you know, for preeclampsia. And he was really up in the sky exploring this, maybe this could happen, maybe this could happen. Very much linked to what you were saying. And then we had Mase Takua, who was looking at some biomarkers for hypertension in HIV patients. So when you asked me that question, I said, well, it really depends. And the really depending is, I think it would be nice to know your profile as well as the topic you are presenting, because then we can maybe say, yes, we can maybe fund that because we know where you are leaning. So it's open to a discussion. The obvious things is this guy is developing AI using a tool that we really like to improved image analysis of sickle cell. That we can fund. It doesn't matter so much of your background. Then another person was evaluating the sickle scan. It's a device, and they are evaluating how well it's working. That we can fund very easily. When it comes to biomarkers, it's a bit on the border. And I'm going to explain to you why we funded Brian and Mase. Brian is bachelor's is in biomedical engineering. So is Mase's. So when they are looking at these biomarkers, they are not looking at them as maybe the medical personnel, the BLT person, or the molecular biologist as per se. So they look at them not wanting to spend so many millions of hours in the lab trying to prove that this biomarker is going to be extracted. So most of the time they are really looking at, okay, you know, what little can we find, how can we dig the literature to give us the evidence, and then we do little in the lab to prove that this happens, and we then quickly move to the device. It may not be the case that during the masters, and it wasn't the case that during the masters they got the device, but we know where they are going, right? Yeah. So I think that needs to be quite well put. And then the other objective is providing opportunities for Makerere University investigators to enhance their research experience and expertise. It's really nice that when Professor Satish presented his topic, for him, you went and talked to him, and then, you know, within days, he's impressed that you actually implemented very quickly what he suggested so that you can present back to him, and he's here. to really give you real-time feedback. This is excellent, and this is what I want. Right now, when I'm presenting my research topics, it's quite interesting because you find me in AI, however little I know, you find me in nanotechnology, you find me in hardware development, you find me everywhere, right? And the reason is we do not have enough people who are at my level, basically. What I want to do now is to be able to split myself up into people who are now medical devices. This is the AI group. This is the nanotechnology group. This is the biomaterials group, and so forth and so forth. And for me, I'm just left in the middle because as things have worked out, I probably would struggle to now say, okay, now let me focus on this one topic and so forth. So for me, then my role will be to empower those groups to grow. So a key point is to try and see how can you and some maybe senior people in Makerere who may not be well versed with AI, link with Professor Satish so that we can create that community of practice, and then we grow a group in Makerere University to grow the area of AI in medicine, sort of thing. Then facilitate BME research connections between MU and CWRU. I think that we are doing. We are linking professors and so forth and so forth. So if I can say, we set out to support, it doesn't say it here, to support 10 master's students per year for 5 years. And I think we set out to support overall about, is it 6 PhD students overall, right? Right now, when you look at the numbers, you have 8 PhD students. Not all of them, I think there are 2 are non-supported by the program. But we found mechanisms where professors at SCASE can actually bring in money to support about 2 years of the PhD program. But then the 6 master's students is showing that we are really struggling to attract people with the right topics. My friend there, Success, has a bachelor's in biomedical engineering, doing a master's in informatics. He has a project which is it TB related? Lung cancer, yeah. So we struggled to stretch that towards the areas that we had proposed to the funders, but he was an ideal candidate to fund. So, and of course, other people think that we will, as long as we submit something, you will fund me. I know my administrator, Joanne, she's not there. She's been harassed by people who have put in their applications and in the end they were not funded. Please don't harass any one of us. Just do a good job of really defining your topic. And part of me talking to you now is that we can help you to, to flesh out ideas and say, well, this could be a nice topic or not. But you come up with something that you've put together partially in a couple of days, and then you put it in because you've thrown in so many of your short trainings. Some people bring in about 100 short training certificates, and then they call Joanne after we have not given them any place that, Joanne, this thing is biased. I shouldn't have wasted my time applying because you already have your people that you want to take, right? Don't waste our time with that, because clearly you can see I am targeting 10 masters funded projects per year. And this is our 3rd year. I should be having 30. I'm having only 6. Yeah. As much as we are interested in funding people to really develop cool technologies, we are not just going to take any, I will not call it rubbish because I'll be really diminishing some of you guys. But please talk to me, talk to us, talk to some of the people who have been awarded, and we can help you to structure a project. Which leads me to another thing. We require you, when you are applying, to have a concept. And as much as that concept is, some of you come when you've defined it already and it sounds great. But as much as that topic you may still be thinking, let me just put in something to fit the call. We can, if we are assessing, we are trying to assess, is this person really serious about research? Do they even know the basic concepts of research, etc.? We can then sit with you and change your topic completely. If we feel you are a good fit, but just the topic is not aligned with what we want. And this is one of the things we actually want to do with some people. If you feel you want to develop a topic, this is a good time to now start thinking, okay, let me speak to the team I've met here, like for example, Professor Satish, Professor Willis. We've been talking and there are some ideas that are coming up. But before I allow you to speak to them, I want to know that when I'm sending you over there to talk to them by email or whatever, you are not going to be an embarrassment to me, because for me now I'm the gatekeeper. I need to know that I'm sending someone who's going to really speak real science and be able to show maturity in what they are presenting. Any questions? I scared you enough? I've guided you enough, right? Yes, exactly. Yeah. So that it helps. So the focus of our project, and again, as I said, the call was non-communicable diseases. You've had presentations around cardiovascular diseases, and we have a team there. You've had presentations about blood disorders, have a team there. What we are struggling to recruit from is the chronic movement disorders and rehabilitation. So people might be interested in that as well. We are happy to hear what you say. And so that's the NCD target, and then the technology focus. Biomaterials and drug delivery, point of care diagnostics, biomedical imaging, and data analytics and AI. So if you fit within there, come and we talk. Or you can even ask questions there. And so these are the PhD students we have, and they have quite a vast amount of interest. These are PhD in other universities. You saw Henry Chiwumulo presenting at the top there. Also Martha Mulera there on the other side. She just finished her PhD and submitted in the UK and so forth. And the areas are quite versatile because biomedical engineering is quite versatile. I think at Case Western, they probably have over 30 faculty, each one with an area of specialization. I might be wrong on the number, but it's quite high. So master's students, I think here you probably would want to see, especially those that we haven't read out, or that people haven't presented. I think everyone here has presented, apart from number 4, who went missing in action. Yeah, everyone here presented. So you can see, at least in summary form, how diverse the topics are. Sorry? Missing in action, yes. So, so this is just summarizing what we've been doing. And we want to ask a question. So after these PhD guys are making all these great innovations and scientific contributions, you know, what's next? How can we really build contextually appropriate innovations? And we've been also looking at different things, such as, okay, we look at the devices, but also, so on this side is more of device-specific publications. On the other side is more of systems and processes publications. Because we realized that, oh, okay, as much as I'm interested in developing that AI-based system for sickle cell image interpretation, how is it going to come into play? What's really going to happen once I have it? Is it just going to sit there and then it will start making waves? And we know that it's not. And if we, at the moment, we as biomedical engineers don't really make these sort of publications that are really making strong statements about this needs to change, look at the frustration that innovators are having, then of course, no one else is going to do it for us. So you find that some of the publications are here, like that green one, we are making a statement that biomedical engineering as a driver for healthcare improvements in East Africa. And it's a nice read because it presents what the landscape is and what potentially we could do. And also we've spent a great deal of time looking at bottlenecks in translation. So looking at, what the regulations are doing, what they're saying, and so forth. So and also looking at really what's happening generally. This is from an extract from Martha Mlera's PhD, where she was looking at the wrist manufacturers. Her PhD was designing a wrist, an artificial wrist. She spent 5 years doing that, right? And she was looking at the wrist manufacturers and also the researchers that she could find online, and they were all up there. No one is in Africa. We couldn't find even some in Latin America, for example. We have this center that we set up some time ago, and we call it a Center for Design, Innovation, and Translation Excellence. We put the word excellence because that's what every Ugandan does, right? You want to be excellent, and I think it's also an ambition to be excellent. We are not quite excellent yet, but we are getting there. And this is a home, mainly virtual, because the people, if you look carefully, you will see that some of these faces you actually recognize, yeah? And so it's mainly a virtual platform, and it's really done wonders because the information we put there, people go and look at and so forth. It was initially funded by the Medical Research Council in the UK, and it's interesting because in Uganda, we cannot say site or site. It's the same thing to us. I don't know if Professor Rollins could help us here. So many people confuse this site for the other site. And of course, I'm not helping because I'm also saying it exactly the same. But I'm not here for an English lesson. But just know, they say, you mean the site project with a C or site project with S? And then we know what we mean. Again, there are resources where infrastructure is being built. So, for example, Uganda Industrial Research Institute has been quite instrumental in helping us in fabrication of devices. We start in the Design Cube, which is hosted at Makerere in the Mulago campus behind the microbiology building. There's that container thing that we use as a workshop. It's an interesting thing because you can go there and you can try out things. Yeah, people get fascinated to hear that we have a 3D printer. It's a very basic 3D printer, but you come in and you say, oh, really, what can it do? And when we tell you, oh, yeah, design something on the computer, then print it, come back maybe tomorrow and pick it. And that's inspiring towards designing and making things and so forth. Then, of course, device classifications. These are processes that we've been defining with input from the regulators, National Drug Authority, Ministry of Science, Technology and Innovation, Uganda National Bureau of Standards. We've helped to develop these processes. And we've published these papers. I'm not going to go so much into that. And I wanted to say that while we want to do the research and build the systems, build the devices, we understand the systems and we expand those bottlenecks so that they are no longer bottlenecks, they are bottle bellies or whatever they are. We also want to say, okay, once that's done, we now want to be able to make devices in Uganda and make them so that they can sell all over the world. And this is one of the projects, we call it the KeySuite project, which is a laparoscope project that I talked about earlier. And what we are doing is we are actually looking the key things that are hindering Of course, there's the business, looking at the business arm. How will you sell? Who will buy? How will you get into the market? But before or during that, we wanted to know, how will the regulators be happy? For example, in Uganda, we have National Drug Authority. We have the international standards, ISO 13485 is the systems, quality management systems that if you are accredited under that. So here, NBA approval means we can sell in Uganda. People will love that we sell in Uganda. But as I said earlier, that people probably do not trust what Ugandans approve that is right. So the next level is the ISO, international standards. But then we can even go higher and have like a CE mark or FDA approval. Here we chose to go with a CE mark. A CE mark means the ISO means you can sell in some other countries, but not all of them. CE mark means you can sell in Europe. And also many other countries really trust and believe in the CE mark. But while we are doing that, we are also trying to figure out how we can manufacture. So we are working with a local startup that we've helped to set up facilities to the right standard, and these are now available. I think, is it next week? NDA is coming in to do an audit, which is more or less the final audit before they can give us a stamp to say, you can start making your devices. So when you hear things such as we went to South Africa in Cape Town to make the preeclampsia kits, we want to be able to make those things here. And the good thing is with point of care diagnostics, there are companies before that are here in Uganda that have made them. We have Acetel. There's a new group called Baylor. I think it's called Baylor Group of companies from Turkey. I mentioned it even before, and they are making those point of care kits. Ministry of Science and Technology wants to set up the center that I mentioned in Kakuto near Nakaseke, where they want to set up things like this. So for us, what we have here at Shishi International Limited is a small scale, but internationally accredited center for making medical devices. But then Ministry of Science and Technology is taking that even broader. So in other words, many people think, okay, research and what, where are we heading? I see these people saying all these great things, but what, then what? It's here that we are showing to you that we are actually making good progress. Maybe I will not bore you with that. It's just showing us that we need to have the right certification. This is a good manufacturing practice certificate, which is offered by National Drug Authority. And then this is towards getting the CE mark for a device. Green means that that thing has been done and we are happy with it. And yellow means that it's almost there. Red means that it's still giving us a hassle. Benedict is heading this particular CE mark of the Keyscope device. And I know that many of these have, since this presentation, when I did it, where was it in September? Many of these things have now turned green as well. And I think there's one or two reds remaining. And again, still pushing. Now, because of the site with a C and also the work that we put out on Twitter, that's why I encourage all of us to be tweeting. I'm terrible at tweeting, but I'm very good at liking and reposting. So when you tweet, do tag me in, because when I like and retweet, then people get interested. So these guys found us on Twitter and they looked at the website and they said, oh, we've seen you are setting up these local systems for manufacturing. Here we made a CPAP device and we want you to now make this device for us. And Brian and I, we thought Brian is the actual project manager for the site with a C project. Yeah. Brian and I, we sat down and said, oh, these guys don't know what they are really giving to us. But that has helped us to now go and convince our university to give us space. And we are lucky it has a building there. We've done, it's in Kasangati, it's Makerere University. And We have done the plan and everything. So we are almost ready, I think, in the next few weeks to start renovating this and making it into another arm of manufacturing for some of these devices. In conclusion, I'll just leave that out there for you to read and then ask you to ask me questions. Which question would you want to ask me?
Wow, I would like to appreciate the work you're doing. It's really nice. For me, it's been really learning. I would like to ask you how I can be part of this such incredible work as someone coming from the public health area. Thank you.
Thank you. I will answer you, and I'm going to be the one taking my own microphone because I want to pick on people who haven't been asking questions, but I know they really have questions. You see, there's a question there that was never going to be hard. How can you be part of us? Speak to me, speak to Brian, speak to the team. Mainly the team at the back there is part of my team. And we can speak and see, okay, how can we be involved? Public health is one interesting area because we are keen on surveillance. And surveillance, I think there are so many things we could pick from the rapid diagnostic test kits, for example, that just gets thrown away with the information. If I give you an example, you test for malaria and the test is negative, what do you do? Throw it away and everyone lives happily ever after, right? However, that negative test, if we keep collecting that and putting it in a database, can start giving us a nice profile. And perhaps, in real time, we know, oh, this is, how malaria is prevailing within the population. Another one who wants to ask me a question, don't you?
Well, thank you. I would like to first of all appreciate this opportunity given to me. My name is Gift Nebyeye. I'm pursuing a master's in health informatics, and my research is in climate and data with the public health problem, which is infectious diseases, pneumonia specifically in children. And from Monday, I've been thinking, how can I go into your field? How can I transform this to what I've been seeing, what others are doing? So my question is, it will come by tomorrow, by Friday, and I'll get to you and we shall talk. Person one, yes.
Okay, great. And again, as I said, I'm usually in the middle. We have a project that's trying to tackle pneumonia through use of pulse oximeter. Dr. Rollins and I supervise design teams across Case Western and here. And when you say climate and pneumonia, and for us, we have a device that can be used to partly to diagnose pneumonia, we could combine the three: climate, public health, pneumonia. See, who else wants to ask me a question?
I supplement, Dr. Robert?
Yes, you may.
Yes.
Even have your mic.
Yeah. Maybe the first person who asked public health, I asked my colleagues here, what is public health? And it seemed we all didn't have answers. And from Google, we see just a quick one: organized effort to promote health and prevent diseases and injury of a population rather than individuals. If I design a diagnostic strip, am I going to public health? Okay, and WHO is saying the art and science of preventing diseases, prolonging life, promoting good health. What's the definition of a medical device? I feel like we are, okay, ideally, we're already part of whatever. So my view is, I think there is a lot. And for example, like site, we are looking for multidisciplinarity. Okay. there could be approaches that public health is actually using, which can, which maybe we don't have in terms of actually reaching communities to see that we actually see a lot of impact. My view is, yeah, you are welcome. You're welcome. All we need is to figure out, how, and hopefully these things will be of interest. Some of these going to deep science and what, but at the end of the day, I see we are all trying to actually achieve the same, which is really a good bonus. Thank you.
Yeah, and thanks, Brian, for that addition. Brian, years back, was part of a fellowship called One Health, and they went out in Kasese, and One Health is basically trying to ensure that the plants, animals, and human beings live in harmony, and we are not spreading disease across. After that program, someone approached him and they wanted him to design a point of care test kit for stress levels in gorillas by analyzing the poo of gorillas. Yeah. So it starts with a conversation, really. And we really need to have the conversation. And we don't want to change people into being biomedical engineers. We want to bring out outputs of medical technology related, innovations. And we want people to think about technology and whichever level. Right now, today we are talking about research and innovations. Tomorrow you might find us looking at, how can we, influence policy in what they are doing. If I don't have a public health expert, a lab technologist, a biomedical engineer, a medical doctor, I cannot speak alone, right? Yeah. So let's have the hands, since people have been putting up hands.
Thank you, Doctor. My name is Enoch Sesanga. I'm very appreciative of this particular presentation. I like the way you introduced us at the start of this program, the start of this training on day one, and where we are now. I think we can have a discussion as well sometime later. But my question related to the current presentation is we have the association, UNAMI, and there are also startups in the field of biomedical technology. How are you leveraging on some of these providers of unique talent and devices, and maybe have you considered incorporating them, because this is a wonderful project? Thank you.
All right, thank you. I will let you know that I'm the vice president of UNAMI. And I'll also let you know that tell me any startup and I'll give you their full profile, because that's what we do for a living. We want to know who's starting in medical devices and what are they doing, right? So UNAMI, I think traditionally has been an association for people practicing in the field. Right now, the president is Dr. John Zobonglosh, who's a biomedical engineer, the dean of FAST at Mbarara University of Science and Technology. I am the vice president. So we are both really into research into medical devices. And again, we said we don't want to stop at that. We have CAMTech, which is Consortium for Affordable Medical Technologies in Mbarara, headed by Dr. Data Santorino. He's been incubating lots of innovators and many startups and so forth. Ask me a question about CAMTech that I cannot answer. In other words, we are linked with so many platforms on individual basis, on university basis, company, you name it. We know all the incubators in East Africa. That green document I showed you did a profiling in Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, Rwanda, South Sudan, Burundi, to see who are the key players in terms of education, innovations, research with regards to medical devices, and what are the regulations saying, what's the profile for each of these countries is. Yes, I hope I've answered you. Before I go to you, maybe I pick this table, otherwise they'll feel left out.
Yes, thank you, Doctor, for that wonderful presentation. My question is, because me, I'm a finalist, MICM, and I'm eyeing to become a researcher, is the opportunity of being funded given to only continuing students, or you can even come as a researcher and then you kind of tap the opportunity of the funding?
Thanks for that wonderful question. This opportunity, we are mainly going through students, but there was another two objectives at the bottom, which is to help to grow networks and collaborations. You don't need to do another master's. Yeah. Many of my team have funding, not because of masters, but because of projects that are interesting. So tomorrow we have a deadline of Makerere Research and Innovation Fund. And I think we have about 4 projects, at least that I know of, that are going in as my team. Now, the university requires to have 1 principal investigator, meaning that I cannot be a principal investigator on all of them. What we do as a team, we say, we think this is a winning idea. So we look for our colleagues in the Department of Physiology, in the School of Biomedical Sciences, and what to say, are you willing to be our principal investigator? Because the requirement for principal investigator is you must be faculty at Makerere, right? So we are putting in all of those. We've won RIF almost every time it's been put out. We at least have projects also. So if you have a project, let's talk. Yes, we see how how can we build it together, who can we apply to, and so forth. Having said that, in the site with the S project, we can allow for really brilliant projects, especially where there are faculty at KES, faculty at Makerere, who want to see it come into light. We can allow for some funds to be given to a brilliant person, not necessarily a student, to help us flush out that idea. We have actually an idea like that already in action. Is a PhD student now at KES, being supervised by Professor Rollins, Bakwatanisa Bosco. Our chair of physiology, Dr. Kaliesula, presented about the uncertainties of diagnosing kidney disease in the African population. And he said they have so much data that needs to be looked into. So Bosco, out of his PhD, decided to take interest in that. And we are facilitating that. And there's also another nice idea formulating from this week around the pathology and AI and, of course, digital pathology. Yeah. Any other hands? There was this one here.
Yes, thank you, Doctor. I'm thankful for the opportunity that some of us got. So if there's anyone who wants to apply, I didn't know Doctor before applying for the site. Yeah, so I didn't know him, but I just applied and got. So I'm thankful for that. So I think the question I had has been addressed because I saw that PhD spots are almost full, 6 out of 8. And my concern was, in case I have an idea, and it's not necessarily a PhD, can I come through the site with a C and maybe work with that in case it's a medical device for implementation? So I think it's been addressed.
The PhD slots are not full. Last year we advertised and did not get anyone suitable. We got people applying, we didn't get anyone suitable. This year we are advertising again. And I think the advert is going to be out very soon, maybe in the next week or so. And again, we hope to get, it's really not good to us and to our funders if we have slots that we do not fill up. Now, the reason we are happy with the other way around is because we are building researchers as per se. If we don't get the high numbers of masters, but we get extra numbers for PhDs, we don't need to aim for the 50 masters, can even be happy with 10, 15 PhDs. So again, we are happy with you. The main reason why we did not get any candidates is we could give you a provisional offer and say, well, we think you're a suitable candidate. Then there's another hurdle or another step, which is you must find a PhD supervisor at Case Western Reserve University. If you do not get a supervisor, then we cannot fund you. Yeah. So, the key person to be convincing to help you to find a supervisor is right here before you, Professor Rollins. Yeah. Are there any other questions? I used to see so many hands.
Thank you very much, Dr. Robert. I believe this workshop has been nice for me. I've been highly converted. The sermon worked. Yes, I think the good thing is even today they occurred it. I'm a designer. Yes, and that's beautiful. I just have a few things that I wanted to know about. The first one is with the networking space. During this workshop, we've come to notice a lot of beautiful work being done. Some of it has been a surprise to me, which is both a good and bad thing. So is there a way we can get to know about all these things in a centralized place? For example, last time I was talking to you about using Professor Satish's ideas of using PyTorch to look at analysis of skin infection. And I was actually stuck on knowing how it goes on. And then today I come to you guys' presentation and the man tells me he did all this work alone. So I'm thinking I can also do it alone. But I really didn't know, because when you look at the tutorials, it's really massive. And I'm looking at all this work being done with the red blood cells, like the affinity, and I'm already thinking of all the different ideas that I could work upon. Is there where we can get to know in a centralized place that I can reach out to this one and probably bounce off a few ideas? And then the next one, how do we get into some of these teams? Now, the teams I'm interested in, you talked about some of the teams that look at grants on Thursday, because I would really want to pick up a few. No, not today, but on Monday, yes, you did. And Tuesday, you did. And so how do we get into some of those? Because at least getting some of those skills would really be paramount to us. And then can we get some of these assays that are used by some of the people at CARES to do some of those studies that they're doing? For example, they were looking at all these assays with all these different projects, and I'm guessing they have a little bit of leftovers once in a while. Is it possible to get some of those this side? Or yes, thanks.
Yeah, thanks for the questions. I'll start with the last one. Can we get some of the leftover assays? I think that depends on individuals, really. Once you've built a good relationship with anyone, then you can start discussing such things. For example, Dr. Rollins has been a friend to me for many years. I think since before any of this research was taking shape. And our need then was we want medical devices that people can train on. And you cannot just walk down the hospital in Uganda and say, give me this device. I have a trainee biomedical engineer that can open up. And because of the relationship we grew, he realized, oh, actually in Cleveland, there's an organization that picks equipment from hospitals in the US and they donate across the world. So we are able to build up that link and they donate equipment to me that people can open and use and spoil. And then we ask for more, they give us more, right? So those sort of relationships are useful because you cannot ask a blanket question. Do you have any leftover assays that we can take? Then I'll be asked so many questions that I cannot answer. But so if you are working together, yeah, it's fine. how do we get into the network? Well, I think the network can be started now, and maybe we can have some ideas on how we could grow the network. I think in many of these workshops, we all live excited, thinking, yes, I'm going to do A, B, C, D. And then we all go back and realize how busy we are, right? And things don't really take shape. I think we really want people, not whether you're a student or not, we want people who really show that they are really dedicated to the core and they really want to see something happen. And we don't have a centralized sort of platform where we put the information. We try to tweet. This Brian tweets more than I do to give this information out. The site, when we can get time, we put updates there. But you know, initially we could just start by talking. I think I'm a bit skeptical just saying, okay, let's all join a WhatsApp group because not everyone is as interested as you and I may be. And, you know, I hate a WhatsApp group that gets started with a lot of vigor and then down the road is just crashes. So for me, how I want to build the network is I want to build the network based on one individual at a time, So, because if you come and you have an area you are interested in, we help to grow it, but then people will start coming to you so that network grows. Brian, for example, is really growing into microfluidics and so forth. So devices, these devices on chips. And we were then consulted by a professor at Heriot-Watt University in the UK. And they said, well, we want you guys to join our global diagnostic frugal network, which is, you know, worldwide. We joined, we made some devices which were not sophisticated. And then before we knew it, the executive said, we want you to be the next leaders of this global frugal diagnostic network. So now I'm the president of that network. I don't even do microfluidics, but because of, you know, our collaboration and being active, there were so many people they could have chosen. They have a very big presence in South Africa, in Ghana, and so forth. But I'm now the president of that network. And the professor there, Professor Mywin, really, really believes in me. But she believes in me so much because Brian does all the work. Right? Yeah. I hope I've answered all the three questions. Yes. I'll come to you after sharing.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Albert, for the presentation. My question is basically about translating the technologies that we develop to market, especially the health ones. I know there is, you know, some improvements that are happening about the right, maybe organizations to actually go to assist in that, but maybe you could give some sort of direction how best someone can go about that.
Yeah, translation of medical technologies is at the center of my interest. And before, it was really us trying to build a bridge as we work on it. Now things are changing slightly. For example, the Science, Technology and Innovation Office, Secretariat in the Office of the President is very, very keen, very keen. I talked last time around the Day Pharma, where they've invested 750 billion. Of course, Kira Motors, they've invested even a lot more in that. And the team there, whom I know very well, are keen and they say, Robert, you are the medical devices person we know in Uganda. Get me those devices that are ready to get off. And, you know, they've basically proved the concept works, which may be minimum viable products, so that we can invest in them. And again, as I said, I think it was Monday, this ministry or this secretariat doesn't want to just give you the money. They want you to be partners with them. And I see it as an advantage, because in the past, people have been saying, well, when you take someone in government, that person might say, you have to put my name on there. But this one is a more systematic approach where it's not an individual, but the government of Uganda through STI says, we shall go into this venture with you. And these guys basically get their doors open very quickly. They have quite a number of collaborations, intergovernmental relationships with so many other countries. Like I know that Turkey, for example, is a very good collaborator with our government in terms of medtech translation. So if we cannot find, if Robert's process is slow, we can go. It's as simple as we can go and knock on their door without even waiting for any call. And we say, we have this idea, we think it's brilliant. If you think it's brilliant as well, give us money. There was a project we are talking about with them, and they said, well, we wanted to give so much money to this project, but we thought, let's first give a little bit and see how it pans out. But we have so much hope in this project that we want to take it so far, right? Yes. That's what. I'm my own MC, which will help me out here.
Thank you so much, sir. What I can say is that these sessions have been a cocktail of skill sets and different people bringing different ideas and dimensions. And one of the things I've observed is that there's people that come from the engineering dimension. Then, of course, the research, which is more or less cross-cut. And then incorporating a bit of the medical science in it in most of the presentations. So that's an observation I've made. But then the other observation I've made is that the biomedical engineering seems to meet the clinical work at the level of the physiology. Because many people that have been presenting, give us a background of blood. And then for me as a Master of Science Physiology student, that really catches me. But overall, my question is, for me now as a Master of Science Physiology student, with the medical background, how would I leverage that proximity? Because biomedical engineering temporarily is housed under the other bigger department. So I'm wondering how I can use that proximity to my advantage to get a bit of mentorship in the line of growing a bit of research skill from the seniors like you.
Yeah, thank you for that point. We've always wanted to be really good and strong collaborators with the physiologists. Electrophysiology is a very big component of key component of biomedical engineering, because in electrical physiology and biosignals, there are so many things we can pick and and be able to display for people to make so many clinical decisions. Unfortunately, the research collaboration hasn't been that strong yet, but I think it can start with you and me, where we say, okay, I'm going to pick on a project. I don't know whether you've picked on a project already, but if you haven't, you can pick on a project which will make the physiologist very happy, and me and my biomedical engineers very happy. As I was mentioning already from Dr. Kalyasula's presentation, Bosco picked an interest, and he's working on a system. So you could say you're also interested in urology-based physiology, and we link you with Bosco, because one of the things we are struggling with is to get someone in Uganda who has the time. Right now, I think he's working with Dr. Senabulia because he was working with Dr. Kalyasula and they got the data, and Dr. Senabulia seems to have a bit more time than Dr. Kalyasula. So we could add someone onto that project if we are interested. And so that way we can build. Now you can see that now we are building a stronger collaboration, which is not just me and you or just physiology. Some of these master's supervision, my name is there because I am the tech person, but not necessarily the person who's most experienced in that area. And I'm more like looking out, okay, how do we ensure that it's still leaning towards technology and people don't get carried away into the physiology so much and in the what? In the other basic science research questions. And I have been an internal examiner on a couple of physiology master's thesis, because again, they were leaning towards devices. Yeah. Hope that's answering your question. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Robert, for that beautiful and wonderful session. Sorry. We are due for our lunch break. The program after lunch is the grantsmanship, and we have it as a joint session. Please, let's keep time back. We need our laptops, and we shall be using the other room. It will be led by Professor Boom and Professor Andrew Rollins. Let's keep time. Have a nice lunch. Yes. Oh, and today we're using the garden tent for lunch, so just out here. Thank you.